All right. Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Matt Hansen, and I'm a state senator from Lincoln. I'm the vice chair of this committee. I'll be running the hearing today since Senator Brewer cannot be here today. And welcome to the Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee. I'm going to go through our opening now, but for the safety of committee members, staff, and pages, the public, we ask those attending our hearing to abide by the following procedures. Due to social distancing requirements, seating in the hearing room is limited. We ask that you only enter the hearing room when it's necessary for you to attend the bill hearing in progress. I guess we only have one bill this morning, but the bills will be taken up in the order posted outside the hearing room. Lists will be updated after each hearing to identify the bill which is currently being held. The committee will pause between each bill to allow time for the public to move in and out of the hearing room. We request that everyone utilize the identified entrance and exit doors in the hearing room. Please note the exit door is on my right, your left of the hearing room. We request that you wear a face covering while in the hearing room. Testifiers may remove their face covering during testimony to assist committee members and transcribers in hearing and understanding the testimony. It's up to the committee members' discretion. Pages will sanitize the front table and chair between testifiers. Public hearings for which attendance reaches seating capacity or near capacity, the entrance door will be monitored by the Sergeant at Arms, who will allow people to enter the hearing room based upon seating availability. Persons waiting to enter a hearing room are asked to observe social distancing and wear a face covering while waiting in the hallway or outside the building. The legislature does not have the ability, due to the HVAC project, for an overflow hearing room. So for any hearings which attract several testifiers or observers, for hearings with large attendance, we request that only testifiers enter the hearing room. And then we also ask that you please limit or eliminate handouts. The committee will take up bills in the order posted on the agenda. Our hearing today is your part of the legislative process. It is your opportunity to express your position on the proposed legislation before us today. The committee members might come and go to introduce during the hearing. This is part of the process as we have bills to introduce in other committees. I would ask that you also abide by the following procedures to better facilitate today's proceedings. Please silence or turn off your cell phones. Please move to the reserved chairs when you're ready to testify. These are the chairs towards the front. Introducers, the process will work that the introducer will make the initial statement, followed by proponents, opponents, and then neutral testimony. Closing remarks are reserved for the senator. If you are planning to testify, please pick up a green sign-in sheet that is on the table in the back of the room. Please fill out the green sign-in sheet before you testify, and please complete the form. When it is your turn to testify, please give the sign-in sheet to our committee clerk. This will help us keep an accurate public record. If you do have handouts, please make sure you have 12 copies and give them to the page when you come up to testify, and they'll be distributed to the committee. If you do not have enough copies, let us know, and the page will help make sufficient copies. When you come up to testify, please speak clearly into the microphone, tell us your name, and please spell your first and last name to ensure we get an accurate record. We'll be using the light system today for all testifiers. With this size of crowd, we'll go ahead and give everybody 5 minutes to make your initial remarks for the committee. When you see the yellow light come on, that means you have 1 minute remaining, and the red light indicates that your time is ended. Questions from the committee may follow. There are no displays of support or kind of reactions from the audience, vocal or otherwise, allowed at the public hearing. This is to ensure the safety, ensure the accuracy of the transcript so we know what testifiers are referencing. The committee members today will introduce themselves, and I'll start on my right with Senator Blood.
Good morning. I'm Senator Carol Blood, and I represent District 3, which is Western Bellevue and Southeastern Papillion, Nebraska.
Good morning. Rita Sanders, District 45, the Bellevue Offutt community.
John Lowe, District 37, the southeast half of Buffalo County.
Good morning. Steve Halloran, District 33, representing Adams County and parts of Hall County.
I'm Megan Hunt, and I represent District 8 in Midtown Omaha.
Thank you all. I'll also note that to my right is Committee Legal Counsel Dick Clark, and Julie Condon on our far left is our committee clerk. We're also joined by John and Ryan, who are our two committee pages for this morning. They are both seniors at UNL. And with that, I believe that's the end of my opening, so we will welcome up Senator Slama to open LB 76. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Julie Slama, Julie-Slama, and I represent District 1 in southeast Nebraska. I'm here to introduce LB 76, which reinstates the winner-take-all system for allocating our electoral college votes for presidential elections. Currently, 48 states award their electoral college votes by the winner-take-all system. Our system of awarding 2 statewide electoral college votes and 1 electoral college vote per congressional district was implemented in 1991, following Maine's passage of similar legislation. This format was billed the election structure of the future, but since then, no other states in the country have adopted this method. Just 2 years after our system's initial passage in 1993, 2 bills were introduced to return Nebraska to the winner-take-all system, with one of the bills advancing to general file. The legislature passed bills in both 1995 and 1997 that would have returned Nebraska to the winner-take-all system, but they were both vetoed. Since that time, the government committee has heard debate on this idea 10 times and passed it through to general file 6. While reading through the transcripts of each of these bills, I saw that there were a few consistent arguments against Nebraska returning to the winner-take-all system. I'd like to address these point by point. The first argument is the current system was supposed to, at least in theory, designed to be a compromise between winner-take-all awarding of electoral college votes and abolishing the electoral college system altogether. However, this current system only exacerbates any issues with the electoral college system. It incentivizes gerrymandering when drawing congressional districts for the benefit of electoral college votes, which is exactly what the framers of our Constitution fought against by empowering states, not segments of states, to choose the President of the United States. Outcomes of presidential elections should never be determined by lines drawn by state-level politicians. Past testifiers also argued that the current system was the plan of the future. They believed at the time that other states would quickly follow in Nebraska's footsteps. However, no state has changed this system since Nebraska did in 1991. One state currently considering a similar system to ours, Wisconsin, features a fascinating rebuttal of Nebraska's system by party Democrats, with former chairwoman of the State Assembly's Democratic Caucus, Kelda Roys, commenting that such a proposal would make Wisconsin irrelevant in presidential elections. In Michigan, when changing to Nebraska's system was proposed in the aftermath of the 2020 elections, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib tweeted, "They tried this racist attempt to change the way electoral votes are allocated in 2015 and failed. Diluting the black vote in Detroit is a page out of the Jim Crow handbook," end quote. I certainly expect a strong delegation of Nebraska's Democrats here today to make the exact opposite arguments, showing that our system, or any variance from the system almost every other state has, politicizes a system to select the president that has absolutely no business being tinkered with by politicians on a patchwork, state-by-state basis. Third, past testifiers have argued that without the current district plan, their vote doesn't count, or they need to feel like their vote counts. We shouldn't be in the business of legislating based on feelings, but in facts, and the facts are firmly in favor of passage of LB 76 and returning Nebraska to a winner-take-all system. In our system, each Nebraska voter only has a say in 3 of our state's 5 electoral college votes. Moreover, our current system creates an outsized urban advantage in the distribution of the electoral college votes, with 2 of our 3 congressional districts heavily anchored by major metropolitan areas, effectively disenfranchising rural Nebraska voters. Returning to the winner-take-all system is simply the fairest way to give every single Nebraska voter an equal say in all 5 of our electoral college votes. Fourth, proponents for the current system argue that the district plan is a unique experiment worth trying. However, how we award our electoral votes is a policy decision, not an experiment. We've used the current system for several decades and through 8 presidential cycles. And it is no longer logical to experiment with our electoral votes, especially when no other states have adopted this system after us. Fifth, proponents justify the current system by saying that the district plan increases grassroots participation and encourages more people to vote. This also has no real basis in fact. The voter turnout in Nebraska has not shown much of a change on average in comparative difference between statewide turnout and national turnout, and that margin has remained almost unchanged since the 1970s. Finally, those in favor of our current plan argue that more presidential candidates would come to Nebraska in an effort to collect an elusive single electoral college vote. Yes, we have had candidates visit our state, but those stops have almost entirely been limited to the Omaha metro area. Turning back to the winner-take-all system would better incentivize attention from presidential candidates across the board, not just in Omaha. If you don't want to take my word for it, let's reference the Washington Post op-ed published January 19th of this year in response to Wisconsin's proposal, entitled "Wisconsin Lawmakers Show Us How Not to Fix the Electoral College." Allocating electoral votes by congressional districts would import gerrymandering into the presidential election process. Because Wisconsin's warped congressional map, if the system had been in place in 2020, Mr. Trump would have taken 6 electoral votes from Wisconsin, and Mr. Biden only 4, despite President-elect Biden's 20,000 vote margin. And Mr. Biden would have fared even that well only because the statewide winner would have gotten 2 automatic electoral votes. Mr. Trump carried 6 of the state's 8 congressional districts. If Mr. Biden had narrowly lost, he likely only would have won 2 electoral votes to Mr. Trump's 8. In other words, the state electoral votes would have been allocated in a manner that was far from proportional. Moreover, moving to such a system would increase the incentive state lawmakers have to gerrymander congressional district maps for political gain. The Supreme Court refused in 2019 to strike down extreme gerrymanders in Maryland and North Carolina, enabling partisan lawmakers to continue drawing bizarre district boundaries. With a freer hand and the ability to warp both congressional and presidential elections, they would have all the more reason to extract every last drop of partisan advantage." End quote. Our current system for awarding electoral college votes turns our proudly nonpartisan body into a hyper-partisan one during redistricting time, with incentives abound to not only draw favorable congressional district maps for the benefit of partisan gain, but also for presidential elections. Nebraska votes for our governor as a state. That is, winner take all. We also vote for U.S. senators and constitutional officers as an entire state, which again is winner take all. Returning Nebraska to a winner take all system for presidential elections would ensure that every single voter in our state has an equal say in how each of our 5 electoral college votes are distributed. It's simply the most equitable way to determine the outcome of our elections, and as such, I urge this committee to support LB 76 and advance it to the floor. Thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions for the Senator? I see Senator Blood.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hansen, and thank you, Senator Slama, for this interesting bill. I also read the March 5th hearing, floor debate. That was my birthday, and I actually watched it that day because I was home, so.
It's like, well, happy early birthday.
Oh, yeah, it's gonna be the big 60. So I actually have several questions for you, and I'm trying to just get them all out right away. That way I'm not gonna raise my hand all day long. But the great thing is that you're an attorney.
Oh,
So-
I'm not an attorney, I'm just a law school student,
Oh, okay.
yes.
So a law school student. So I think you'll know some of these answers, and I'm hoping to have some really good discussion with you.
Wonderful.
All right, so there's my introduction. So can you talk a little bit about the Equal Protection Clause in the First Amendment for me? Because I was listening to kind of your introduction. And that's the first thing that came to mind to me. So what's the other name for the Equal Protection Clause?
I don't know that offhand.
I've heard it called the one person, one vote clause.
Sure.
So if you take away the electoral college system as is in Nebraska, explain to me why it wouldn't deprive voters of being adequately represented.
48 other states have the same system, and it has not been found in violation of that clause.
But do these other 48 states have a unicameral that make them unique like us?
I don't understand how being unique in one way justifies being unique in other ways.
Because I feel, I mean, I guess it's not my job to answer that question, so I'll hold my opinion on that one. So sometimes but I do feel that we have our very unique state. Where is the vast majority of our population? In eastern Nebraska.
Yes.
And where would you say a huge concentration of people who might be, maybe be more progressive tend to be?
Well, I'd say it's congregated more towards urban areas. That's the point of this bill, that every single voter in the state has the same say, and that we're not splitting up votes by congressional district to give more swing to some voters than others. It's simply one person, one vote for each of our 5 electoral college votes.
What would you say the number one concern in our protests this last year were from people of color?
I would say they had several concerns. I wouldn't feel comfortable speaking for them.
Would you say one of those concerns were that they felt that they don't have a strong voice here in Nebraska and that they're not heard?
I'd say yes.
And so would it be a surprise to you that many feel that taking this away, especially from urban Omaha, is also taking away their voice?
Well, I would say, as I referenced in my opening, the other argument is being made in the opposite direction in Michigan, where our system being proposed is being implemented there is being perceived the way that you're describing my proposal. So I think the most truly fair way to ensure that all people, regardless of race, religion, where they live, is that each voter has a say in every single one of the votes. That's as fair a way as I can think of to give all of those voters an equal voice in our elections.
And so the opposition is saying that that's exactly what's happening now. Why do you want to change it? So I hear what you're saying, but I also definitely strongly hear what they're saying. So we know that voting and accurate representation are fundamental to our democracy, yes?
Yes.
Okay. So you've explained how you believe that this will impact the one person, one vote principle that was established in '64 in Reynolds versus Sims. That's the same case that we use when we talk about gerrymandering, right?
Yes.
Okay. So they always say that states should represent people and not geographic districts, and you're saying that you feel that the way it is right now, it represents a geographic district, while people who oppose the bill are saying that taking this away takes away their representation.
Well, we haven't heard any opposition testimony yet. Who knows?
That's
The people
true.
behind me could be in favor of the bill.
That's true. So do we as a state want to continue to increase voter turnout?
Absolutely. Yes. And I think the best way to do that is to give all of those voters an equal say.
So you don't believe that the current system increases voter turnout, especially among minority communities?
No, I referenced that in my opening, that the proportional margin of difference, Nebraska is very blessed to have an average turnout that is higher than the national average. But that's been across the board since the 1970s, since this was put in place, and that's remained relatively unchanged on average in the aftermath of the implementation of this system in 1992.
And I think that actually answers see, I think you and I look at the same question and see a different answer. I mean, so what you're telling me is that's why we need it, and I'm telling you that's why we don't need it, because there's urban Nebraska and there's rural Nebraska. And rural Nebraska, based on what we're getting, the way we do it now, has their voice strongly heard. Trump, urban, Biden. And it doesn't matter whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, those were actual votes, those are actual people. So I always go back to that court case. It's one voice, one vote. So if you feel that their votes matter and we want to represent their voices and bring in more voters, especially among minority communities, why do we want to take away this one small tool we have to empower them to vote in presidential elections?
Because we'd be empowering them to make their voice heard on 5 rather than 3 electoral college votes.
So you say we don't make legislation on feelings, but I could give a long list of legislation that passed last year based on feelings.
I prefer facts personally.
I'm gonna remember that forever, you know that, right?
Yes, I'm sure it will come up.
So, you know, it's a fact that there's discrimination in Nebraska, yes?
In certain
Just-
contexts, yes.
All right? It's a fact that we as senators have heard from minorities that their voices aren't heard,
Yes.
okay? So is it a fact that one of the reasons that Biden won was because minorities came out and showed strong voting among the Black, Latino, Native Americans, Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, and other communities of color?
I'd say overall, Americans made their voices heard regardless of their racial identity.
So, again, I keep going back to this because these are the people that I'm hearing from. So if Nebraska is viewed as an obvious vote after the implementation of LB 76, how would this impact our state's grassroots activity, especially when it comes to how much money is spent in the media? How many jobs do you think this is going to affect by changing this?
So are you arguing that money in media is a reason you should oppose the bill, or could you
I think it's
phrase
one
it
of
in a
a
different
long
way?
list. I can definitely reframe that. So one of the things, since I know you read the transcripts,
Yes.
and I have to say that all of the positive things they said were going to happen did happen. Their crystal ball was accurate. One of the things that they said was going to happen is that it's going to make us have a stronger voice as a state, and that we're going to start seeing more candidates come to Nebraska than had been coming to Nebraska. You know, you always hear the expression "flyover state." If I can I'll use my own experience as an example. I have digital TV. Because I have digital TV, people can buy political ads on digital TV. And as soon as that presidential campaign is over, all of a sudden there's place cards with music, like elevator music, because they've not been able to sell those spots. I talked to people at different TV stations, different radio stations. There are millions of dollars spent on presidential elections within the media. So if we're trying to change something that's not broken, in my opinion, why do we want to add to that and also affect people's livelihood?
Well, I mean, I'd question whether the sheer volume of political ads is a sufficient enough reason to oppose this bill, but let me give your experience a counter by my own experiences and my own community's experiences. When this bill was passed in 1991, like you said, we were told we'd receive more attention from presidential candidates, and we have had candidates visit, again, solely to the Omaha area. However, one of the proudest moments in my hometown of Auburn, I have two hometowns. I'm from outside of Peru, and I went to high school and graduated from Auburn. One of the proudest moments in our community's history is in the 60s. Then presidential candidate Kennedy, I believe it was Bobby Kennedy, visited our community and had a presentation at our band shelter. And whether you want to talk about changes in approaches to campaigning, the fact that all 5 of Nebraska's electoral college votes were on the board meant that the entire state was to be campaigned in, not just in the Omaha metro area. And if we're going to argue that media spending is a reason to keep our current situation, wouldn't we want to spread that wealth among other media markets in the state of Nebraska? Because I can assure you that political spending will still happen. Personally, I'd rather not see as much political advertising, and I'm sure most Nebraskans, regardless of party identification, would agree with that. But I truly think this gives Nebraska across the board a far more equitable way to determine how our electoral college votes are determined.
And I have to say that in Hastings, Bobby Kennedy came as well. But
Yes.
If you did read the transcripts, you noticed that because as our state demographic changed and other states' demographics changed, how presidents did their campaigning also changed. And so, yes, in the 60s, presidents were still coming, but really if you start looking in the 80s, in the 90s, I'm not sure how old you are, so.
1996 is my...
Okay, so I remember when Kennedy came to Hastings. So I think that data says otherwise. So I appreciate your opinion, but I think the data is there that they don't really care about us without that, I hate to say blue dot, but without that dot. So, I'm sorry, I'm almost done with my questions.
No worries, and I would just counter to that point, the exact opposite point was made in Wisconsin, where all of the Wisconsin major newspapers came out and said, if we adopted Nebraska's system, where we divided up our electoral college votes by congressional districts, we would be rendered irrelevant. So I do think there's arguments for both ways, but the end of the day conclusion is our framers intended for states, not segments of states, to determine the outcomes of elections, and we shouldn't be deciding presidents on a patchwork, state-by-state basis. It should be fair across the board.
That's what they say about the unicameral though, too, so. So you had talked about how in the hearing, people had suggested that we needed to get it done because other states were gonna fall in line.
Yes.
And that was part of the conversation, but the other part of the conversation is that waiting for other states was kind of pointless. It's either a good idea or it isn't. And that was Senator Schimmick that said that. And then it was passed with 29 votes, I believe, right? And I came up with 16 attempts to return to winner takes all. So how many did you have?
I had,
Did you have like 10 or 11?
well, I had a few before that, so I think closer to that 16 number, because I did speak about the two bills that were introduced in 1993, that's around the same number.
Why do you think, for the ones that didn't have a debate, why do you think most of them have failed?
Well, I mean, 2 times it's passed and been vetoed, and
Why do
I
you
would
think
argue that
is?
the threshold to override a veto is higher than the vote that this bill received in 1991.
Right. Would you say that our current electoral system in Nebraska diluted our standing in presidential politics?
Did what to our standing?
Diluted our standing in presidential
I
politics?
do, yes.
Because,
Because you you split the electoral college votes. We're stronger as 5 votes together than as 3 votes separately by congressional district.
but the difference of one vote didn't change the outcome of the last 2 presidential elections where the vote was split, right? In 2008 and 2020?
In the 24 times where votes could have gone to a different party, it has only happened 2 times, and neither of those times have actually impacted the outcome of that presidential election cycle, which I think further gets to my point is that it really hasn't been that big of a difference in relevance in presidential campaigns.
All right. So the original bill had bipartisan support, yes?
Yes.
So it was obvious by the debate that there's some that were hesitant to support the bill back in 1991. But their concerns were simply that there was worries of the potential impact and the lack of information, that they wanted to have a study. Would you say that's accurate?
A potential study to the current system before implementation?
Right.
Yes, that's accurate.
Okay. So can we at least agree that this original reasoning for opposing the bill really no longer carries any relevance?
The original reasoning for
For why they were against the bill 3 decades later?
I would say in the transcript, these same arguments of Nebraska becoming irrelevant in presidential campaigns, similar arguments that I'm making now were brought up during that time now. The ones that you brought up saying that further studies are needed, yes, fine. Those are, I think we have plenty of data to show that LB 68 should be passed.
So,
LB 76, sorry.
excuse me, I'm sorry. So in 2011, were you aware that Republican Party leaders threatened to withdraw financial support from their candidates if they were just to vote against a bill like this? when it's been
I
brought forward
was
in the
a
past?
sophomore in high school in that time, so I was not savvy to the political goings-on.
Would you think, if you were to hear that, and you were just a normal person who wasn't involved in politics, if you heard something like that, would you think that there might be a partisan motive behind trying to eliminate something like this?
Do you think that the Democratic Party would withhold support for candidates who supported the passage of LB 76 based on how strongly they've opposed this concept in the past?
I absolutely do not believe that, nor have I ever, in the long period of time, been involved with the Democratic Party, ever been told something like that.
And I've never
Because-
been told anything similar from the Republican Party.
Were you aware that that happened in 2011? It was in the
I-
Omaha World Herald.
I was not savvy to that, no. And I do believe we have a representative from the Republican Party here, and he could probably shed more light on what happened there.
I think that would be really an interesting conversation. So Senator, I do appreciate your efforts, and you've done an excellent job of presenting your case. But I still am going to be really curious to hear what the opposition, if indeed there is opposition, has to
knows?
say about that, because I remember the original debate, and everything that Senator Shimmick and the supporters said about this bill happened for the positive, and all the negative on the debate did not happen. And I don't understand why we're trying to fix something that I don't see as broken unless there's a partisan motive behind it, and I'm hoping that that is not the case, because we are a nonpartisan body. So I will look forward to hear what the pros and cons are of this bill.
I appreciate that, and just in closing would reference my point about the partisanship of gerrymandering for electoral college votes. This is an entirely nonpartisan bill meant to take the politics out of deciding the boundaries of electoral college votes in our state.
And so, I'm sorry, so are you saying that there will never be gerrymandering because of this? Or are you
I'm
comparing it
saying
to-
that there will no longer be drawing of political boundaries for congressional districts with electoral college votes in mind, because it would be winner take all.
I think that's a whole nother conversation. I'm going to allow other people to ask questions. All right,
Thank you, Senator Blood.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Are there any other questions? Senator Howard?
Thank you, Vice Chair Hanson. So, do you believe that having two states, Maine and Nebraska, with not having winner-take-all effectively creates a 51st and 52nd state? In other words, we're splitting those states up in their electoral votes.
Yes.
We're a unicameral, and the prefix uni means one. It would seem to me that it would be more unifying if we stuck together with one state. Your opinion on that?
I completely agree with you, Senator.
Okay, thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would just have a final question, Senator Slama.
Yes, sir.
So you talk about kind of the founders and the intent of the Electoral College.
Yes.
Was the, can you, trying to figure out how to phrase this. So, do you believe the founders intended the Electoral College to be unified blocks from each state? Or did they intend it to be the delegates being able to make their own, the Electoral College voters being able to make their own independent decisions?
That's a concept that has evolved over time. We saw throughout the 19th century, the trend was, at least through the early part of the century, to have the state legislatures decide. And that concept has evolved later on to making it popular vote within each state to determine electoral college votes. So it is an evolving concept, but the core idea of what they were getting at, regardless of whatever method you look at was used in the 18th or the 19th and then on to the modern day, is that it's up to the states, not the parts of the states, to determine the electoral college votes and decide the presidency.
All right, I think that's a fair summary of the history, so thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none? Thank you,
Right.
Senator.
Thank you,
for
Vice
presenting your
Chairman.
say. And with that, we'll move on to proponent testimony. As a reminder, please have your green sheets filled out and bring them up to the page and the committee clerk. And with that, we'll welcome up the first testifier.
Thank you, Senator Hansen and members of the Government, Military, and Veteran Affairs Committee. My name is Ryan Hamilton, R-Y-A-N, Hamilton like the musical. I'm the Executive Director of the Nebraska Republican Party. We are the largest political organization in the state. We represent more than 605,000 registered voters. And I'm here today to testify on behalf of the party in support of this measure to move to a winner-take-all system. This measure would move Nebraska to a standardized election system along the lines that 48 other states conduct elections. It would correct the injustices that have been longstanding since a political ploy pushed by then Governor Ben Nelson resulted in this bifurcated system that made the 2nd Congressional District a swing district. Since the 1992 presidential election, our state has permitted by law what is essentially a voter inflation scheme by making one part of the state's votes considerably more valuable than any other part of the state's vote. It prioritizes people who now live in what is the 2nd Congressional District over those who live in the 1st and the 3rd Congressional Districts. This way of doing business has exacerbated the urban-rural divide within our state and divides our political strength for little or no reward. Since 1992, very few candidates have actually made an appearance in Omaha, and when they do come to Nebraska, as Senator Slama pointed out,
I am sorry.
they exclusively go to Omaha. The system we use doesn't make much sense. By way of illustration, if this system was adopted nationwide, the at-large basis of rewarding electoral college voters would result in many disagreeable outcomes for presidential elections. In 2012, by way of illustration, Mitt Romney would have prevailed over Barack Obama 274 to 266 electoral votes. Instead, because of the more just way of doing business in other states, the outcome tracked much more closely with the popular vote, and certainly the popular vote of every other state. And President Obama won re-election 332 to 206 electoral votes. The idea that it's partisan doesn't make much sense. We would be here advocating for a system that would sometimes produce a Republican winner in some circumstances and other times produce a Democratic winner. The reality is the basis for this push is fairness. The dramatic reversal for Romney could have only been achieved by the type of political gamesmanship that we permit in this state by law and have for every presidential election cycle since 1992. The at-large allocation of electors dramatically increases the stakes of redistricting, driving gerrymandering, a process that this legislature has historically tried to curtail with legislative fixes. This one simple voter fairness change would reduce the stakes associated with redistricting and take away much of the drive that exists to draw lines favorable to this candidate or that candidate. This measure should be a part of that anti-gerrymandering conversation. Our current law both incentivizes Republicans and Democrats to draw lines in Sarpy County that would give their political party a statistical advantage in presidential election years to award their presidential candidate that one electoral vote in Congressional District 2. It's unfortunate that all this time and effort is focused on the minority of Nebraskans who live in Congressional District 2, while the other 1.25 million Nebraskans are typically overlooked and have had the value of their vote deflated by political maneuvering. If presidential candidates want to be awarded any electoral votes from Nebraska, they should have to earn it to making it to the voters across the entire state, not just in one congressional district. I want to thank Senator Slama for introducing this bill, her brilliant testimony in favor of it. I was very impressed by that. And I want to thank all of you for allowing me to testify in support of an issue that so many Nebraskans care about. On behalf of the State Republican Party, I strongly encourage you to advance this bill to the next phase of legislation.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions, think me? Senator Blood?
Thank you, Vice Chair Hansen. Thank you for your testimony. I'm sorry about that. I tend to watch what's going on my phone, and I didn't turn the sound on.
No worries at all.
I apologize. Did you hear my comment about 2011? Can you verify whether that was true or not?
I can't. I'll begin by saying that not everything printed in newspapers is true, but at the same time, I can understand why somebody who was in my position or the position of the chair might make this a priority. It's been a long-standing priority for the party. My understanding is the reversal of this measure has been in our state party platform since likely the year it passed, 1992, right after they adopted that measure. So I can't say one way or the other, but it wouldn't surprise me.
So if I hear you correctly, based on your party platform, if you have people that are in office, that it is your demand that they vote a particular way in support of that platform?
No, I wouldn't say that. I would say that the party tends to support with financial resources those candidates most ideologically in favor of the party platform. That seems to follow, yes.
So no freedom of thought.
There's certainly freedom of thought within the Republican Party. We've got 605,000 members, many of whom have various agreements or disagreements on any one political issue. To characterize it as an issue of freedom of thought, I don't think is entirely accurate. I would also point out that most of the opposition in the state is as uniformly opposed to this change, that is to say the Democrats, as Republicans are uniformly in favor of it. And I would suggest that that's because it empowers those progressives that you mentioned at the opening of your testimony, that they're trying to protect those votes by deflating the value of votes in other parts of the state.
Well, I don't know if we're protecting progressives, we're protecting people of color who tend to feel that they don't have a voice in Nebraska. So I want to make sure that that's very clear. And the question I asked was not in reference to the many Republicans that there are in Nebraska. It was in reference to the Republican elected officials. So I respect the fact that Nebraska is broadly Republicans. And I got some Republican friends, so I'm just teasing you. But I think it's very telling when, and I have to say, since it's clear that I'm a Democrat, I've never experienced that in my own party, so it seems very foreign to me if people are threatened for not supporting an issue. So I give you kudos for having such strong convictions on your party platform. So you don't feel that this in any way will tell people of color especially, because really that's what we're talking about when we talk about this area, right? Because really, rural voters really are already in control of 4 of the 5 electoral votes. Wouldn't you say that that's pretty accurate?
I don't know if they're in control of. Their vote counts. Rural voters, yeah, they have a determination in it, sure.
Okay.
I don't know if I'd agree with that exact phrasing.
But in general, we have a consensus.
Yes.
All right. So, knowing that, why are we worried about this 1/5 of Nebraskans feeling like their voices are heard? Why are we trying to trample that down? Isn't ultimately that people are unhappy with the results of the election, the last 2 presidential elections, where maybe a man of color became president, and now we have a woman of color as a vice president? I mean, it almost seems like we're trying to take away that enthusiasm and that voice.
Well, I'll again illustrate the point that Mitt Romney would have prevailed over Barack Obama under the system that Nebraska had if it were adopted nationwide. I'll again say I subscribe to what I guess is now considered old-fashioned notion that one person, one vote should be the basis of the law, and that an individual's color ought not come into that
But that's easy for us to
vote-making
say.
process.
We're white, that's easy for us to say. We didn't have to pay poll taxes, and we didn't have to take that to the Supreme Court to make sure that our voice was heard. So I think we have to be really careful, because we come from a point of privilege. I believe that we have to really take a step back and take ourselves out of the picture.
Suffice it to say, I disagree with that.
I have to say, I respect the fact that you believe that this bill does one voice, one vote, but I believe the existing principle is one voice, one vote. And we hear a lot of decrying about partisan gerrymandering, and I'm going to be really, really acutely aware who opposes the maps, because I sit on that committee, that are advanced this year during redistricting, to see if they want to create a partisan advantage, because I've seen many of the memos come out that say that's a very important issue for a certain party. So I just want to make sure that we stay on task, and that we hear the voices that feel that if we change this, they're discriminated against. I appreciate your answers.
Very
Thank you
well.
very much.
Thank you, Senator Budd. Any other questions, committee members? Senator Howell?
Thank you, Vice Chair Hansen. So I'm sure the Republican Party doesn't keep track of race for the registered Republican voters. But the assumptions that we hear a lot of times are that, or the presumption is that there are no black Republicans, or no Republicans of color. Is that true?
That's not true.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Senator Halloran. One final question, actually, Mr. Hamilton. I guess you might have already indicated this, that it's part of your party's platform. But, so you're the executive director, correct?
Correct.
And I guess, is your testimony based on the state central committee, the state chair, just the state party platform?
The state party platform.
All right, thank you very much. That clarifies it. Thank you. Any other questions? All right, seeing none, thank you for your time.
Thank you again.
We'll invite up our next proponent. Are there any other proponents? Hi, welcome. She can stand up.
Hello, I'd first like to thank Mr. Chair and the Honorable Committee. My name is Amelia Aspen, AMELIAASPEN. I'm 11 years old and in the 6th grade. I'm here in opposition of LB 76. First off, when we split our votes, Nebraska's opinion matters. One thing we can all agree on is that we made it this way for a reason. If we're going to change it to winner takes all, let's at least not do it now. We just had a very contentious election, to say the least, and we don't want to make a big transition right now. We've split our vote for many, many years, and I'd like to point out that we were totally okay with it. All these years, and now we want to change it to winner takes all. It seems a bit off. Quite honestly, it feels like you're asking the Electoral College to subsidize underperforming party politics. We want all voices to be heard, not just one opinion. Please don't hesitate to ask any questions.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Senator Blood with a question.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hansen. Good job.
Thank you.
Can I ask what motivated you to come and testify today?
Well, our family is really into politics, and this is something that I thought I really wanted to keep because I thought it was working fine, and I don't really want anything to change about our thing and stuff that I put in my speech. And then also I just thought it'd be a fun thing to help with.
Good for you, and I hope that you continue to use your voice for the greater good. Right?
Thank you, Senator Blood. Any other questions? Senator Hunt?
Thank you for being here today, Ms. Aspen. Can you tell me more about what you've learned about Nebraska's unique system in school? Do they talk to you about it in school at all?
People in my school try not to really talk about politics. So I've pretty much learned everything at home.
That's great. I'm proud of you for being here. Is it your first time testifying?
Yeah,
I hope you keep doing it.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you again for your testimony. You did great. All right, just to confirm, was there anybody else in the room who wanted to testify in support of LB 76? All right, seeing none, we'll switch over to opponents, and we'll welcome up our next opponent of LB 76.
Yes.
Welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee. It is a pleasure to be here today, and it's a particular pleasure to hear a young woman, or maybe I shouldn't even say a young woman, she's still pretty young, to come and testify before a committee like this. I would have been shaking in my boots at her age, and she just did it with all kinds of aplomb, let's say. So anyway, for the record, my name is Diana Shimmick, and I am here in opposition to LB 76. That's an easy number to remember. I think of 1776 when I think of 76. So I don't want to think of this as a Patriots bill, however, Senator Slama.
Ms. Schimmick, before you go further, can we have you spell your name?
Oh, Shimmick, Schimmek.
Thank you.
And may I ask a question before I go ahead? I was originally going to pass out handouts. You're not doing that?
If you have them, we can have the pages hand them out. We're just asking people to be conscious about it.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead and do it. I've got some of the same information that Senator Slama shared with you regarding how many bills there have been and what the results of all those bills were. And so that's the top sheet, and I won't go over that because she did an excellent job of telling about all those bills. Actually, after Senator Christensen's bill was vetoed by Governor Nelson, there weren't really any bills that went very far, and that was back in 1983. So it's been a long, long spell of trying to do something to do away with the winner-take-all, or to do away with the electoral college scheme that was put together under LB 115. I want to say that I guess I'm not going to go over my testimony. This testimony I pulled out of a file somewhere because I've testified, I think, on every one of these bills that have come up. And so you can imagine how many files I have and how many testimonies there have been. But I think I covered the main points that I would like to cover in this written testimony. And I guess a couple things I would like to highlight, however. At the bottom of the first page of testimony, it says, I also believed at that time that a change in the electoral system might prevent the unfortunate results of someone winning the popular vote but losing the election in the electoral college. And of course, that didn't actually prevent it, but it was a possibility. But the most important reason you'll see in the bold type for enacting the bill, and the reason we should not undo the previous legislation in this area, is that it encourages grassroots activity. And I don't know how anybody could argue that grassroots activity hasn't improved over the years. And it encourages more people to vote, and that is very, very important in this era of deep personalization of politics and the advertising wars that occur in every election. It is critical that citizens know their votes count. This is a state with a small but very diverse population, and it is important that citizens feel they have a chance to make their voices heard. And then I point out in this testimony that there were 3 elections in our history before the bill passed in 1991 in which there would have been a winner of 1 congressional district. That was, those 2 of them were in the 40s, and Franklin Roosevelt actually got a district each of those times. And then I think it was Lyndon Johnson won the state, but Goldwater actually won the 3rd district in 1964. And then finally, I'd like to say that I think that this is the time to put this issue to rest, that it has been up on the agenda and up on the agenda and up on the agenda, and I think it's time to put it to rest for a while. It didn't cause any serious problems. It had some good effects. In fact, over the years, I've testified on the kind of economic development, if you will, which has been brought to the 2nd Congressional District by staffers coming into the state and eating at restaurants and getting hotel rooms and so on and so forth. They weren't quantified with a great deal of confidence because a lot of that had to be supposition as to what the actual income was. But there was economic impact. And,
Ms. Shimmick,
yes,
you're at your red light, so if you just give us your final thought. I know it went by fast.
ooh, I wasn't watching. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about that redistricting issue, but I will let somebody ask me the question if they want to.
Absolutely. Are there questions to the committee? Senator Blood.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hansen. Senator Schmick, you talked a little bit on the economic impact that your bill has had. Did you ever hear from the Nebraska Broadcasters Association or any other groups about the impact?
No, I didn't. And I wasn't looking at that. I was just looking at things that, because it's hard to know how many advertisements how they would have increased over any other particular situation. But you know that there were people who came into the state and rented offices and
Right.
had phones hooked up and all that kind of thing. So I tried to put together something that was modest. And I think the one time I figured over $1 million impact that was the Obama race in 2008.
I think this, and I have to go back through my notes, but I think this last election for presidential, I think there was something like $6 million spent in the last cycle for the presidential
Ooh,
election.
I'd like to have that.
So, I'll have to dig that out for you.
Thank
So,
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator Howard?
Thank you, Vice Chair Hansen. I'm not sure, I understand that the economic impact may be of significance for some people, but I'm not sure it's all that important for the issue that we're talking about.
I agree with you. It's not, but some people are interested in that kind of
Well,
information.
clearly they are, and that's fine. So, the state was founded in 1867.
Yes.
In 1991, we passed LB 115. That was 124 years of it, winner take all. Maybe you can enlighten me on what was wrong over that 124 years that needed to be changed with LB 115.
Well, I'm going to kind of come at the answer in maybe a little bit backward fashion. But I want you all to think about the fact that 1968 was really the last year that Nebraska mattered in the sense that we were one of the few states in the United States that had a primary. And so we got a lot of candidates in here. I'm sure you can probably remember when Eugene McCarthy came in. Well, that was 72. I'm trying to think of who came in. Frank Church. There were a lot of candidates that came into the state and campaigned here because we were one of the only places they could go and do a primary. So I think when we talk about the fact that Nebraska was really going downhill in terms of interest from some of the campaigns after that date. And so, in my opinion, it needed some kind of a boost. The idea, this was not incidentally Governor Nelson's idea. In fact, I didn't even know if he was going to sign the bill or not. I didn't talk to him about it beforehand or anything. It was an idea that came from a conference, and I thought it sounded like a really, really good idea. But the redistricting part of this issue was always, it was always there. It was always a political issue. I can remember in, I think it was 1968, being at a legislative hearing where they were hearing bills on redistricting. And that was a very hotly contested partisan issue. And it's not always so much on the legislative level, but on the congressional level, it's always been very partisan. So I don't know how you cure that without taking it out of the hands of the legislature, if you will, and giving it to a committee that proposes maps like they do over in Iowa, and then asks the legislature to approve. But I'm kind of wandering from your question. Would you like to?
Well, the reason I bring the question up is we've been, since LD 115 has been 30 years, right? That we've split the electoral votes in the state of Nebraska. And part of the argument I'm gonna hear, and I think we'll hear from other testifiers, is it's been that way, don't change it, right, after 30 years. And my reason for bringing up the 124 years from the inception of Nebraska to the passing of LD 115, a lot of people would have argued it works, why fix it, right? That same argument.
Well, and Senator, I have to mention that back in the early days of the United States, a lot of states did do district kind of elections. District delegates, district electors were chosen, and votes were counted that way. Gradually, states moved away from that. Not all at once, but gradually they did. And I think Senator Slama even alluded to that in her testimony. So it wasn't always the same way in those 100 and some years. It wasn't always the same way. And as you know, states were given the ability by the Constitution to decide how to pick their electors. And so that's why it was possible for us to introduce this bill. It's why we only needed to pass a bill rather than a constitutional amendment. But states have total flexibility in that.
Should it have been a constitutional amendment, you think?
No.
Why not?
Well, times change.
Well, but what I'm saying is, why not put it to a vote of the people back in 1991? Why not put it to a vote of the people on how they wanted their electoral votes to be?
We don't put legislation, well, I guess we do too. We don't generally put legislation to a vote of the people, but only if it's a constitutional amendment originally.
Right.
I don't think you want to do that to this particular thing. There may come a time in the future when we decide this isn't a good way to do it anymore.
Might be now.
No. It's too early.
Well, it's never too early. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Halloran. Any other questions? All right, seeing none.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Hi, my name's Danielle Conrad. It's D-A-N-I-E-L-L-E, Conrad, C-O-N-R-A-D. I'm here today on behalf of the ACLU of Nebraska to oppose this measure. To start out, let me be clear. The ACLU is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. So we don't have a stake in a blue dot or red sweep or anything like that. Our organization has for many years been a key defender in voting rights. And our organizational position has opposed the Electoral College for many years. But we in Nebraska, at the Nebraska affiliate, have taken the position that this is a good common sense compromise that works for our state. And why it works for our state is very, very important. Because Nebraskans should have an opportunity to cast a meaningful vote. And this unique system in Nebraska allows them to do just that. I think it's also critical, you've heard talked about already in dialogue today, that when looking at this measure, you can't erase history and you can't erase race. And those components and factors have to be at the forefront of this discussion. Additionally, and paraphrasing Judge Kagan for unanimous court in a recent decision about states' abilities to regulate the Electoral College, excuse me, the Califano decision from 2020, I think, well, I appreciate that Senator Slama has brought this measure forward. I think that her arguments fail both when looking at the text of Article 2, which establishes the process for the Electoral College, and then of course has been subsequently amended through the 12th Amendment, 17th, 20th, 25th, but also the history. And Senator Shimmick talked about this as well, and I think Senator Slama did admit that at the beginning, that early in our history, actually, states did use a measure very similar to this. And the court has been clear, and the Constitution is clear, that it is up to the state legislature to decide how to allocate electoral votes, period. You can look at the text of the Constitution itself, and you can look at a host of Supreme Court decisions dating back to the 1890s. I'd cite the McPherson case for you, the Blair case in 1952, Classic case in 41, the Williams case in 68, the Arizona redistricting case in 2015, and then again, the Chiafalo case in 2020. The court has been clear across the justices' ideological spectrum that states have maximum flexibility to decide how to allocate their electoral votes. It's important that Nebraska maintains this unique common sense compromise that was in fact envisioned as part of the compromise itself when the Electoral College came about, trying to strike a balance between the national popular vote and political leadership. We thank Senator Shimmick for her long leadership on this. This measure has been defeated about 16 times, I think, in Nebraska. When it went down most recently, you know, we hoped that would be the end of it. But unfortunately, we see this continued injection of hyper-partisanship into our nonpartisan body and our unique nonpartisan traditions in Nebraska. It also has to be said that this measure was introduced right after the insurrection in our capital. And at the heart of that horrific day was a fierce battle about voting rights. And we can't erase that history from this dialogue as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but let me be clear from a legal perspective, states have every right to move forward in this direction. And if folks thought otherwise, they wouldn't be making those arguments here today. They'd be making them in a court, and we'd look forward to helping with that case. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator. Questions?
Thank you, Vice Chair Hansen. The Constitution is also very clear that states have the exclusive authority over establishing voting procedures and rules in their respective states,
Yes,
right?
yes. I thought I might hear from you this morning, Senator
And
Holleran.
they had
Yes.
at least 5 states. And that was the Texas lawsuit's contention. It wasn't, Texas lawsuit didn't get into the nitty-natty detail of this precinct didn't do it right, or there was miscounted votes over here, over there. It was dealing with a constitutional issue that the states exclusively, the legislatures, have control over the voting procedure. But yet in those 5 states, and I know that we're Nebraska and we're not part of those 5 states that did that, they let the executive branch and judiciary, or a combination of the two, change the voting procedures. So, we're not perfect in many respects, but
Sure.
at least we respected the legislature in that regard. And I have no contest about whether or not the legislature should have control over this issue. But that being said, what's wrong with the other 48 states? Are they just rubes?
Well, Senator, there's a lot to unpack there, but let me start by saying I'm biased. I think Nebraska's the best, so. And hopefully we can get a lot of agreement there.
That wasn't my question. to you.
Sure, but let me unpack some of the other pieces. So when you're looking at the heart of some of those challenges in the most recent election, they're governed by a different part of the U.S. Constitution. So that would be the times, place, manners provision in Article 1, which gives states a significant amount of authority to set reasonable regulations and rules around congressional and other elections. Congress also reserved for themselves quite a bit of preemptive power if states were to run afoul of other congressional, other constitutional issues. But when it comes to the Electoral College, that's really governed in Article 2 around the executive branch. So these issues weren't at place in that most recent litigation. I appreciate and understand the perspective that you have brought forward, but to be clear, a couple of things. Under the time, place, and manner clause and states' abilities to regulate their elections because we have 50 state elections, right, for president and for our local work, some states actually do delegate provisions and powers to electoral boards, to Secretary of State, to other actors in the system, and that's been upheld as permissible and is a long-standing, well-established process. Of course, there were also unique considerations that came into play because of the pandemic in 2020. And so there was opportunities that legislative bodies, electoral boards, and courts weighed in on to protect and facilitate the right to vote, because that's at the heart of our democracy, and that's what happened. And those claims were all rejected by the United States Supreme Court, ultimately.
Well, the Supreme Court didn't hear the Texas case. I didn't mean to digress on that
Sure.
much, but what's wrong with the other 48 states? Are they just rubes?
No, I would not say that. I think each state has many wonderful attributes about them. But I think that just as we chart our own course with our unicameral, with public power, with NRDs to a certain extent, we have the right and the ability as a state, embracing our sovereign immunity granted to us under the 9th and 10th Amendments, to chart our own course. And that's what Nebraska has done proudly on this issue. Before, when they decided winner take all was appropriate, and in 1991 since, when they decided that an electoral allocation was a better way to go.
And don't you believe LB 76 is giving us the opportunity to chart our own course?
It would give us our opportunity to chart our own course to go back to winner take all, absolutely. But I think that the history is clear, the policy is clear, the law is clear that Nebraskans have enjoyed the opportunity to cast a meaningful vote with this electoral allocation.
So is my vote more meaningful now since 1991 than it was before?
Well, I don't know. You'd have to answer that for yourself.
Well, but you used the phrase, and
Yes,
that's why I'm asking.
but I will tell you personally, in our electoral work that we do in voter education work, that actually the voters that we talk to are very excited that Nebraska has a different way of casting their electoral votes. Because we hear a lot of times people kind of shrug or have a cynicism and say, well, my vote doesn't count because this electoral college thing and et cetera, et cetera. And I said, well, actually not in Nebraska. You have a chance to weigh in a different way, and people's eyes light up and they're like, oh, that's kind of cool.
It's good to see people get excited about this
Absolutely.
kind of thing. I would like to see some of those conversations and see their eyes light up, but thank you. Ms.
Sure. Well, that's always a fun conversation when we're talking voting rights.
Thank you. Other questions? Senator Lowe?
Thank you, Vice Chair, and thank you, Danielle, for being here
Good to
today
see
and
you.
speaking. Senator Slama brought up other states and how they have thought about doing this, and they said, oh no, we're not gonna do that. What do you say about that, and say that if we implement this in California? Do you have
Sure.
an answer?
Yes, and I think that she did a great job of laying out kind of exactly how other states are approaching this very issue. But I think, unfortunately, what she did leave out of that equation was the fact that many of our sister states have embraced electoral reform by adopting a national popular vote compact, for example. Quite a few states. So while many states have not moved to this specific reform measure, many of our sister states have embraced reform to the electoral college process in their state.
But have they done it?
Have they adopted a national popular vote?
Have they split the vote?
No, I don't believe that, other than Maine and Nebraska, any of those other measures about electoral vote allocation have passed. They have been introduced, and they have been fiercely contested, I think, from partisans dependent upon the political landscape in those states. Yeah.
Would you say it would weaken the vote of the California vote if they would split their vote the way Nebraska does?
Sure, I think that that's definitely been a hot topic in California, Wisconsin, and other states that have taken this up, and people have been reluctant to embrace this reform. But again, that's up to their state to decide how to split their electoral vote. It's granted specifically in the text of the Constitution, and it's been played out in Supreme Court case law. So it's up to each state to say what's best for them in this regard. And Nebraska has said, throughout its history, once it was winner take all, since the 90s, it's been this electoral split. So that's our right, and we can look for guidance to our sister states, but it's not dispositive. The Constitution is, and the will of Nebraska voters is.
Wouldn't you say that that is what LB 76 is doing, is bringing it to the people, as we have people here today? And
Sure.
all the prior bills, and including Senator Shimmick's.
Yes, this is exactly right, and Senator Shimmick laid it out right, and I think Senator Slama did as well, that this is a decision for the state legislature and the people of the state to make. Yes, so this is an opportunity to go back in time, pre-1991, and return to a winner-take-all system. Similar efforts have failed 16 times in Nebraska for a host of different reasons. We're here today to say that we believe that this is a common sense compromise that generates voter excitement and activity, and allows Nebraskans to cast a more meaningful vote. Think of it this way, Senator. We have district elections for city councils and county boards and school boards. We've moved away from winner take all in a lot of those electoral landscapes because it dilutes communities of interest voice before those bodies. This works the same way with our electoral college vote. And I think there's a ton that binds us together as Nebraskans, but I do think that we have different priorities and different perspectives and different needs in different communities in the state, and this gives voice to that expression.
But don't we want to be seen as one state?
We are one state.
One vote, one state?
This does not violate the principle of one person, one vote, and in fact, it strengthens it, right? Because you have an opportunity to cast 2 of the electoral votes for the statewide winner. And then you additionally have the opportunity to cast an electoral vote in your congressional district towards the candidate of your choice. And that's a good thing, right? It's good to have competitive elections, and it's good to have a lot of interest in our democracy. And look no further than even the 2nd congressional district, right? There in the most recent election, I believe actually Congressman Bacon and Senator Sass won that district handily and beat their opponents. But this gave voice specifically to voters in that district who were voting for many strong Republican candidates to say, I disagree with the presidential Republican candidate, I'm going to cast my vote a different way. And then that was reflected in our electoral vote as well, which is pretty cool.
I look at this as a husband and wife,
Sure.
one Republican, one Democrat. Their votes contradict each other. It's like nobody voted in that family.
Or they both did, right?
Well, they both did, but their votes don't count because they contradict each other's vote. And so I see that. We have 5 votes, and yet one splits off, and that takes away one other from the other side. So it's not one vote. It's a partial vote.
Well, sure, and Senator, I guess I would disagree, because it depends on how the voters act and which candidates elicit their support, right? Because you can look, for example, at the history, it's not a straight partisan slam dunk, right? We've had this in place since 1991. We've seen a split in CD2 twice in that time, in decades. So I think it just doesn't, history doesn't belie that this is an automatic slam dunk for one party or the other. It's up to the candidates and it's up to the voters to decide how this allocation is going to happen.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I would have a question, just to kind of
Sure.
clarify your overall position. So is it the position of ACLU and ACL National to oppose the Electoral College?
Yes, that's right.
So your opposition to this bill is that if we have to be under the Electoral College, the district system is kind of
Right.
the lesser of bad options?
Yeah, so how our organization works, we have a large national organization, which of course we're uniquely tied to, but then we also have essentially sovereignty as individual state affiliates to chart our own course. So the ACLU writ large has long opposed the Electoral College for a host of different reasons and has called for reform. We in Nebraska appreciate and understand that, but we also appreciate and understand that this is a unique Nebraska reform that we want to maintain.
And can you summarize why the ACLU has opposed the Electoral College as an institution?
I just didn't
Sure.
grab the first
Can you
part.
just summarize the opposition to the Electoral College in general, the ACLU?
Sure. I mean, I think that this comes up a lot in our organization and in our democracy, right? People are looking at the Electoral College over the years. I think there's been something like maybe a couple hundred attempts to reform the Electoral College in our history, either on the congressional level or at the state level, because people see it as fundamentally undemocratic. They see it as an antiquated institution and would prefer to move to a winner-take-all popular vote kind of system. There's deep concerns about how it erases and minimizes the voices and votes of people of color, of black voters, entrenches minority positions in the presidential stakes, for example. And we've seen that play out, right? Where, 5 times in our nation's history, we've seen the Electoral College votes be awarded to a presidential candidate that lost the popular vote, right? And every time that happens, it kind of renews interest in this reform dialogue.
All right, thank you very much. Any other questions? Senator Lowe?
Thank you, Vice Chair, and Danielle, good to speak with you again.
Always.
Thank you for answering those questions.
Sure.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, that with the Electoral College, we should split our vote, but with the popular vote, we shouldn't split it up by state with the Electoral College. I mean, an election, you're saying it should be won by the popular vote.
Mm-hmm.
But by splitting up our electoral votes, it's not won by the popular vote. It's
Ye-
won by districts, and isn't that what the Electoral College is kind of doing now?
Well, a couple of
Otherwise,
things.
we're being controlled by the big cities and the East Coast, West Coast. Our area would not have a say-so if it was not for the Electoral College.
Right, and that's the exact position that small states have advanced since the initial compromise before the in the drafting of the Constitution, right? And that persists through today. So our position is that we would prefer to have a national popular vote, but until that happens, we think that this is a common sense solution to better meet the needs of Nebraska voters within that existing system. And I don't think that this measure doesn't anticipate abolishment of the Electoral College. So,
No.
yeah, but
No.
I understand the tension, yeah.
It's kind of wonky. Thank you.
That's the bumper sticker, yeah, I'm gonna have to stitch that on a pillow, I think.
Thank you, Senator Lowe. Any other questions?
Okay, thank you so much.
Seeing none, thank you. While we're getting ready for the next testifier, I just presume most people in the room still want to testify? Could I get a show of hands of people? Thank you. Come on up.
Hello. Thank you, members of the committee, for hearing me out. And thank you, Pages, and everyone else who's present to help this be a safe and secure situation. My name is Alex Munson. It's ALEXMUNSON. I don't come here as a Democrat or Republican. I come here as a school teacher. And I'm from originally the western, I like to say as far northwest as you can get and still be in the state, north of Harrison, Nebraska. And I go back and forth every summer, from here and back and forth. And so I like to believe that I get a wonderful experience from both or all sides of this state. This this paradoxical conversation almost of, federal rights, state rights, individual rights. We're worried about, the state not being represented on the grand sphere of the country because of not a unified vote. And we're worried about individual rights as far as those within Nebraska, whether they be on the eastern side of the city, the rural, the western side of the state, et cetera. And I guess ultimately I believe that I don't think that those who are presenting this, I'm opposed to it. I don't believe that those who want to change it back are cowards by any means, but I think this is a cowardly act. I think it's censorship. I think that the reason why, to answer some questions from Senator Holleran, I think we had 100 and some years of one system, then we changed because we became more enlightened. I think that we started with a state that did not have large cities such as Omaha and Lincoln and communities that were full of diverse peoples, and then we grew to have those peoples, which is why we changed our system, so that those voices could be heard. It's the same reason we don't have slavery anymore. We find that something is wrong or it doesn't work or that there are voices being suppressed, and we change it. And I think that that's why Nebraska has the government it has today. When you're talking about being sophomores in high school, I went to Boys State as a junior in high school, and one of the things we were most proud of was the Nebraska government because of this idea of individual voice being heard. And to address what Senator Lau was saying about, man and wife, I guess I can't ask questions yet, but if you love your children, if you love your family, you don't control them. You don't tell them, you're gonna be this way, you're gonna do what I say. You're gonna let them kind of figure it out on their own. And yes, if you have a man and a woman who are Democrat, Republican, and they disagree on something and their voices counteract each other, I don't think that's what's at worry of being lost. I think what's being lost is individual agency. You don't just see the man submitting to what the woman says or the woman submitting to what the man says. You see them both being individuals with voices wanting to be heard and enacting those voices through their actions and their votes in the unicameral system that we have, and the representation that we have. And I think that on this conversation of unity, I think that if you switch it back to the way things were, I think it will actually create greater division, because I think that you're suppressing voices. I think you are making all the voices in Omaha and Lincoln. I mean, that's just the way Nebraska is. Like, the other states, they have their different ways because those are different states. Nebraska grew the way it has. We have Omaha and Lincoln, and we're rural communities, and we're figuring it out. But right now, that's where those voices are, and that's how those voices are heard when they speak and when they vote. And the excitement for voting in Nebraska is present because they feel like they can be heard on an individual level, and because they're not just washed over in this sea of red. Go Huskers, but not just, we don't want to feel just washed over this sea of red in Nebraska. We want to feel like we can actually show up and have our voices be heard. And I think that if you were truly confident in your message and what you stood for, you would feel confident that you could just say those things and convince the people of this state to stand with you and act with you, rather than causing them to submit to just this winner-takes-all system of red wins, game over, right? I honestly think that's what this is. I know you can't say it in all these legal things, but right after this election, it's just, oh, we're scared that red can't take the whole state, better switch it back. And I'm just going to call you out on that, and I believe that you're better than that. I believe that you have voices that have worthwhile things to say. I hear them every time I go back and forth across the state, and I think that you need to believe in those voices rather than just forcing people to submit to the winner-take-all. That's all I have to say. Let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Munson. Are there questions from the committee? Seeing none? Oh, Senator Lowe.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I want to ask a question that Senator Halloran asked earlier. So are the other states just rubes besides Nebraska and Maine?
I don't think that's the right way to phrase it. I think that each state is trying to figure out what works for them. I think that we were brave in trying to change our system. It's a very complicated process, as many of us know and imagine through even right now. And I think that it speaks to Nebraska's enlightenment that we are a stronger state. I don't want to use these just kind of blatant adjectives, but I think it speaks to our unified nature in that we believe ourselves confident to function this way, that we can be competitive with our ideas and come out on top of something better, that we don't feel like the other states who are maybe, it might be a fear of change, it might be a fear of lack of control as far as other states are concerned. As many of these cases are, but I just simply think that we should not say that they're a rube. I think that we should just look at Nebraska and what we're trying to do, and I think what we're doing is right.
Well, isn't that what this bill is also trying to do, is trying to look at change, trying to...
Oh, I think so. I think so, but I think it isn't going back in time. I think it's going back to an archaic and a system that doesn't truly represent all voices in this state. I know we are concerned about getting that one unified win, represent ourselves on the national level, but I think that you would have people leaving this state. I would want to leave this state if I didn't feel like my voice was heard in the system that we have in place. And I think that if we were to change it back, I think that, excuse me, I'm getting excited. I think it changed the way it did because of what we are now. And I think where we are continuing to move and where we are still is not a place that wants to move back to that. I think moving forward means that we still oppose this bill.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lowe. All right, we'll invite up our next proponent.
Thanks, Ryan.
Morning, Senator Hansen. I have to say that your page does the best job of anyone in the county getting these cleaned up, so we know we're safe.
Appreciate it.
Senator Hansen, members of the Government Committee, my name is Al Davis. I'm here as a registered lobbyist testifying in opposition to LB 76 on behalf of the 3,000 members of the Nebraska Sierra Club. We believe that the winner-take-all approach disenfranchises voters in every state, not just Nebraska, but every state. Democrats dominate in California, and rural Republican voters are disenfranchised just as Democrats are disenfranchised in red states. Nebraska's current method builds enthusiasm among voters and offers a system which should be the model of the nation. Winner-take-all amplifies the power of the large states over the small ones, and the swing states over the red or blue ones. President Trump visited Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan over 12 times. How about visits to Colorado, Idaho, North Dakota, or Wyoming? Not one. The candidate lavishes attention on the uncertain possibility while ignoring the certain inevitability. So who loses in that scenario? I can't tell you how many times I heard Nebraska mentioned in the news this fall. The prognosticators like to draw maps where Nebraska's blue dot might put Trump in power or Joe Biden. The state was discussed in a positive light by cable news commentators and print journalists who are interested in maverick news stories. All that publicity puts the state on the map, publicity which you can't buy, and that publicity pays taxes. Television advertisements were purchased. Staff was hired, all to turn the blue dot to one team's advantage or another. President Trump held a rally in Omaha while Jill Biden and Doug Emhoff visited Papillion. Neither of these visits would ever have happened if there wasn't uncertainty about the election. We have a good system, let's just leave it alone. I'd like to make a few comments about some of the things that were said earlier, which I find to be amusing. The discussion that the winner-take-all proposal really amplifies gerrymandering, and I wasn't here when the legislature redistricted last time, but there was so much anger and hostility in the members who were here over the gerrymandering that took place then, largely to protect congressional districts. So I think to say that this has anything to do with the presidential election is completely irrelevant. There's been discussion about Nebraska's influence. I thought Senator Shimmick made a really good point about that. If you go back to the 60s when Bobby Kennedy had his train trip across the state, my father was invited to attend that. And there were all kinds of people coming in here because our primary was a big deal and a very important one. I'm sorry that our representatives didn't protect that, move the primary. I'd like to see something like that happen so Nebraska could again have some influence on the national stage. Presidential policy depends a lot on what happens in those primaries. And you know, if you go look at a map of the visits that President Trump made, places like Iowa, New Hampshire is just dotted with visits there, and nothing, you know, in other states. But that's another issue. But we have a good system. I think Daniel Conrad made good points about the national popular vote piece, which is a compact of states to try to sort of make the process a more democratic one. Senator Logue, you talked about the spouses, and my parents were both Democrats, but you know, they always voted the Democratic ticket, and so they actually never cast a vote that was really worth anything in the state of Nebraska. I'm not sure I think that's really a good process. Go back and look at why winner-take-all came into being. It wasn't that way when the nation was founded, but the bigger states said, if we can cast all our ballots for winner-take-all, we're going to have an outside influence in what happens in the presidency. So this policy was dictated not through a democratic process, or not to further a democratic process, but to further a political party's influence. The unicameral was designed by George Norris to eliminate a lot of political influence. I think this does the same thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Questions? All right. Oh, Senator Howard?
Thank you, Vice Chair Hansen. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Senator. No one's talked about it yet, but I think it's important to have some discussion about it, the Equal Protection Clause. Very simply, Equal Protection Clause spreads that equality to every voter within a jurisdiction, in this case the state. Right? And the issue I have with the way we're doing it now is it gives some Nebraska voters different voting power for president simply based upon the population in those districts, right?
Well, I wouldn't say that necessarily. yes, there's some more focus on what happens in the metro, because the metro's in play. If the other two congressional districts were at all in play, there'd be a lot of interest in them. They're just not. So I don't see that argument really carries any weight.
Well, I think it does, because in the higher populated districts, they have a disproportionate advantage by having separating their votes in the electoral college based upon the population in those communities, in that district specifically. Anyway.
Aren't they disenfranchised though if that district really largely likes the system that we have today, but we want to change that and deprive them of their right? Because isn't that what you want to do by passing this bill? Deprive them of their right to cast a ballot, which might switch the election one way or the other?
I think no matter what you do, someone's going to complain about disenfranchisement.
I would agree with you there. Yeah.
Whichever way you go, there's going to be people complaining about it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I see Senator Blood.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hansen. I want to just make sure that I bring this point up before I ask this question. The first question I literally asked Senator Slama was in reference to the Equal Protection Clause of the First Amendment. So we have had discussion about that already. So did you hear that question earlier when we talked about the Equal Protection Clause of the First Amendment?
Yes.
So.
One man, one vote.
Yep, one person, one vote.
Yeah.
So if I hear you correctly, since we're talking about that particular thing, taking away the electoral college system in Nebraska would deprive voters of being adequately represented.
Well, I think so.
Okay.
You know, if you're going to say we're going to put the whole state has to march along to the same system, it seems to me it deprives people who are in the minority party or the minority in anything from their positions. You know, that's one of the problems with parties is they want everything their own way. I think if the parties would sit down and visit, could find a solution, but that's not going to happen because everyone has a vested interest in the current system.
And we have sincerely lost the ability that I remember growing up in rural Nebraska to listen first to understand. Now it's us versus them, and there doesn't seem to be anybody listening to really what the other side is saying. We just want to be right.
Right, absolutely.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Look.
Thank you. And thank you for being here today,
Thank you, Senator
Senator
Blood.
Davis. I kind of alluded this with Senator Conrad, that I know we're in Nebraska and we're dealing with just Nebraska. But let's say you were in California and this was brought up only in the reverse. Would you be arguing the same point in California that you're arguing here?
Absolutely. I think the system that we have, this is my personal opinion, not the Sierra Club's. I think the system that we have today needs to be completely reformed.
So-
Because we're producing elections that pivot on certain specific states. Only the swing states really matter anymore.
So this is just your opinion, not the Sierra Club's?
Correct. I mean, I've submitted testimony of the Sierra Club. I just don't want the Sierra Club to say, well, Davis said this, and that's not what we said.
No, I understand that. What do you think the Sierra Club would say?
The Sierra Club's opinion is that we need an approach that is more democratic and representative. And so that's why we came in support of this bill. It was one of the bills that the Sierra Club Legislative Committee raised to the top. We have about 10 bills that we thought were most important. This was one of the 10.
And I know my son lives in California, and he is in a pocket of conservatives in California. So their voice is not heard because of the Electoral College in California.
Right, that's
So
why we
you would
made
agree with
reference
that?
to that, yes. And that's all over the country.
Yeah.
So you've got Democrats in the South who
There are pockets everywhere.
aren't listened to, and Republicans in New York who aren't listened to. So, you know, reform makes a stronger system, I think. When half the people don't feel like their vote ever counts, you've got a problem.
Well, I don't think we'll ever accomplish that. It would be a nice thing, but I don't think
I'm
we'll.
hopeful, Senator, that someday it will happen.
All right, thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lowe. Seeing no other questions?
Thank you,
Mr.
Senator
Davis.
Hanson.
Thank you for doing that.
Hi, welcome.
Hi, my name's Judy King. It's spelled Judyking, and I am in opposition to LB 76. Please make this part of the record. Trump lost the election, and according to 60 court cases, and several of them Trump appointees and secretaries of state, the election was fair. So Trump stated that only the way the GOP would ever win an election is if they stop the other side from voting. So you got to work, and you came up with this bill. And the day that Precious McKesson was giving her historic vote here in our capital so that Biden could have a decent vote count in our state, I started out the door only to find Ryan from the party of Trump, formerly the GOP, giving an interview to take that vote away. And I'm not surprised to see that they used Senator Slama to do it. We watched how mad Trumpsters, formerly the GOP party, were to think that their vote had been stolen. The party of Trump, formerly the GOP, has chosen a path that are champions of white supremacy, Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, and militias, Tactical 88, and Radical Christian Right, and is nationally doing everything it can to limit minority representation. They were mad enough to take over the Capitol in DC, and even though if any intelligent person wanted to know more about voting, the voting system, all they would have had to do is get involved with their Secretary of State and become a poll watcher. Or even better, work at the polls. Are the Trumpsters so inept that they can't tell a lie from the truth, or do they just want to do away with democracy and take over the country? Well, I am here to tell you, we will not let that happen. We will not let you take our votes away or roll over to your voter suppression. I have watched what suppressed voters and people in your party, whatever it is called now, have done this last year. They are all heroes and heroines. In the middle of the pandemic and risking their lives, they have stood in lines for hours and in the rain just to have their vote. And the truly funny thing is that your party even did it to some of your own voters, made them wait in these long lines. The next time you try to take away our vote in Nebraska, we will do the same thing the suppressed voters have done across the nation. What you do to one of us, you do to all of us. No matter what impediments you put before us, we will overcome because there will be more of us helping the oppressed. The party of Trump, formerly the GOP, needs to start telling the truth to its voters and needs to start trying to find some ethics. What you are doing with this bill is plainly voter suppression. Please, Senator Slama, think deeply what bill you put your name on, and do not take our democracy away. Thank you, and I have nothing more to say.
Thank you, Ms. King. I presume there were no questions. With that, we will invite up our next testifier. And while he's coming up, I'd just like to remind anybody that we have a rule against reactions to the audience. I know there's been some laughter and some stuff today. For the transcript, that gets a little confusing for the transcriber, so just make sure to be kind of quiet and let the testifier have their focus.
Jonathan never tires of this. He could be a pit crew member for a NASCAR race crew any day with the speed he does that. Morning, Vice Chairman Hanson, members of the Government Committee. My name is Jim Timm. That's Jim-Timm. I'm the President and Executive Director of the Nebraska Broadcasters Association. Our membership represents the over-the-air AM, FM, and television FCC licensed broadcasters. We number over 200 stations and over 40 different companies in our membership across the state. And I'm here to testify in opposition to LB 76. We believe that every citizen's vote should count, and therefore we should maintain our current system that ensures that every citizen's vote is valued by all presidential candidates. Under LB 76, Nebraska risked losing further national relevance. Dating back to 1916, Nebraska's presidential primary was a focal point of national media coverage, despite our smaller number of voters. Moreover, Nebraskans, as has been said by many people, could meet national candidates in person as they campaigned in our state. Those who couldn't meet them were at least able to view them through the eyes and ears of their trusted local media outlets. Through the years, as bigger states and consolidated primary dates pushed ever forward, Nebraska and her citizens became further diminished in this process. And we believe LB 76 will further diminish our national relevance and afford few, if any, chances for our citizens to have access and influence to the national candidates, even as they vie for all or part of 5 electoral votes. If LB 76 is passed, Nebraskans would only see presidential candidates through the national media's perspective. Nebraska TV and radio stations would be forced to report solely through the eyes and ears of these national news sources. The coverage would not include visits to Nebraska, interactions with our citizens, or interviews on issues that affect Nebraska, all of which do provide meaningful information for citizens as they decide how to vote. Do we really want it left to national media outlets, cable network shout shows, and social media to educate Nebraskans on our presidential candidates? I hope not. For TV and radio stations serving Nebraska's 2nd congressional district, LB 76 would greatly reduce, if not eliminate, presidential candidate advertising revenue, as candidates and their supporters would steer their funds out of Nebraska into states expecting closer races. Even with these presidential elections occurring only every 4 years, stations rely on this revenue to help keep their newsrooms adequately staffed and to keep up with technological advancements to keep providing relevant content to their audience every day of every year. Let's keep Nebraska relevant and allow our citizens to continue their closer connection to presidential elections. We respectfully ask that you not allow LB 76 to advance. Thank you for your consideration, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Other questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, members of the committee. I am Sherry St. Clair, SHERI-STCLAIR, and I'm just here as a voter in the state of Nebraska. And I guess I could also say a 4th-generation Nebraskan who comes from families that vote all the time. My preference is that the Electoral College be abolished. Since that's not going to happen, I think in my lifetime, our current system that we have in this state is a suitable alternative. We know that this system we've heard is used in Maine, Nebraska. It's been proposed to a lot of other states with variations on the theme. Most recently, it's been proposed in Colorado, with a percentage of the votes going to a percentage of the electoral votes, a kind of a relationship. As you pointed out, it hasn't made traction in a lot of these states. I think that's because, as Senator Slama rightly pointed out, there is a relationship between gerrymandering and the Electoral College. Additionally, a number of states, I think it's 15, have kind of given up on the whole Electoral College thing and have adopted or voted for the National Popular Vote Compact, where all the electoral votes in their state would go to whoever won the national popular vote. I think that our current system does serve to help make Nebraska relevant. I don't think we would have gotten any presidential candidate visits or any media attention or limited media attention if we were winner take all. We wouldn't have seen Steve Kornacki in his khaki pants on November 3rd, pointing out Nebraska with the red and blue stripes. So I think that the current congressional district method more accurately reflects the will of the people, and I hope that LB 76 does not make it out of committee.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, I think it's still morning. Name's Leon Sanders, Senior. Just happened to be visiting the Capitol here to renew my LLC. And just happened by here, so I thought I'd stop in and see what we had going on in here. And to my surprise, it's something that's really great, and to this gentleman here in the Sierra Club conversation, so I just been kind of listening along. And I have just wanted to throw my little short situation in here, because I'm saying, but you kind of make the point for the gentleman from the Sierra Club and the rest of the people that are referring to California and your son and how he is not being counted. Well, with that, you would think that Nebraska would, in my opinion, have a really nice system where everyone's counted, including the people of Omaha and the ones that we don't want to be counted anymore. And so, that's, I don't have any notes. This is fly by the pants, seat of the pants situation. So I thought that, just listening to some of the conversations, I thought that me being a black individual in this state would like to see, the minorities, communities in this state remain counted. And so from your testimony to the gentleman from the Sierra Club with the California situation, maybe they should adopt what Nebraska has to us getting rid of it. And so that's how I feel. Fly by the seat of the pants, no notes.
Perfect. First things first, can you spell your name for the record?
The last name, first name, all of it?
All of it.
Leonsanders, Senior.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes.
Questions in the committee? Seeing none, and if you'll make sure to fill out the sheet the pages have.
Will do.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time, and I appreciate you listening in.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Karen Shaper, K-A-R-E-N-S-C-H-A-P-E-R. I am a school teacher. I'm a school teacher, and I've taken one of my 2 personal days to be here today because this is so important to me. And so I'm just going to tell a couple of stories, and I hope people can step out of their corners for a minute and just listen to what I have to say, because I think I'm coming from a little bit of a different perspective. I'm here just to thank you for taking the opportunity to give me to speak in opposition of LB 76, winner take all. I'm going to skip the part about how this system, having CD2, keeps people engaged, like myself, who was never engaged in politics. And then when I lived in a swing district, I became active and have been very active trying to get people involved in either side, just in voting. So I'm an example of why keeping CD2 relevant is important. So we want to be people engaged, not apathetic. Expanding voting supports healthy democracy no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on. And if you're against increasing engagement in voting, I think your heart might be in the wrong place. Like I said, I've been a teacher for the last 20 years. In these 2 decades, I've worked at colleges, middle schools, and high schools. Firstly as a science teacher, but also as an advocate for sustainability. And I would tell you that often lately with video games and Snapchats that our students exude apathy. And it's hard to get them moving and engaged. And because I think in general they believe their actions and their beliefs don't have any impact on the world, so they kind of sink into their snaps and their stories. But when you show them, like this young girl who was in here before, that they can make a difference, they become empowered and they become engaged. And when they feel their opinion matters, they engage in life. And I don't know if you have kids and you've seen them just kind of like gaze into their phone for hours and video games for hours, especially now that they're home all the time. But if you can engage them in the world, CD2 engages young people. It's something that we forget when we're talking about the law. But the reality is when these kids feel like their voice matters, they engage in the world. And we need that to grow Nebraskans for the future of Nebraska. If they feel like their vote doesn't count, they're just gonna keep snapping and doing their stories and playing their video games. And my second point has to do with my neighbor. So this current system brings needed business to Nebraska, and I know that other people are saying that's not necessarily true, but I would just like to tell the story of my neighbor whose business was saved this past fall because of the presidential candidates and their surrogates coming to Nebraska. Next page. My neighbor and his father own a business that sets up fencing for large-scale events, and as you can imagine, with COVID, they were struggling with parades, concerts, festivals all canceled. Their business was very struggling, but when former President Trump came and President Biden's allies, they were given the income they needed to stay afloat for that time, and now they think they're gonna make it because business is picking back up. He got paid to set up fence for all these events, and it's helped feed his children and paid his mortgage and has kept his house warm these last few days. And I wonder how many small family businesses there are out there that have benefited from this. So I hope you listen to that, and it's not just a dollar value, it's like people, it's my neighbor, it's my best friend. So I hope that you can hear that story. So in summary, I oppose LB 76 because it limits voter participation and youth engagement, not necessarily voting, but just engagement, like this young woman who was here, and income for the state's small family businesses. So thank you.
Thank you. Questions to the committee? Seeing none, thank you. Welcome.
Good morning, Senators of the Government and Military and Veterans Committee. My name is Jaden Perkins, and I'm from Omaha, and I'm representing Black Votes Matter. I come to you today as a grassroots community organizer who is strongly opposed to LB 76 because this issue is simply another form of voter suppression. Over the last year, during a deadly pandemic, many organizers across the state, like myself, worked tirelessly to mobilize thousands of voters, specifically in North and South Omaha, to come out to the polls like never before. Because we knew that this was perhaps the most consequential election of our lifetimes. All of that hard work resulted in President Biden and Vice President Harris gaining the 2nd District's electoral vote. And for the first time ever, a Black woman got to cast that vote on our district's behalf. This moment is history that should be honored by simply keeping the split vote the way it is, not reversed because a certain party failed to win in the last election. The split vote encourages fair competition from presidential candidates, which results in robust voter turnout. Those things are what makes democracy a beautiful thing. And if you truly believed in it, then you would vote to strike down this anti-democratic and anti-American piece of legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. And first and foremost, can we have you spell your name for the record?
Oh, Jadenperkins.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. Any questions from the committee? All right, seeing none. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Welcome.
My name is Preston Love Jr., Prestonlove. I am the CEO and founder of the organization in Omaha called Black Votes Matter. I have included about an 800-word statement that you can relax. I'm not going to read the 800 words. I wanted to come down today. Quite frankly, I'm going to be here most of the day testifying at the various hearings on various bills. And ladies and gentlemen, quite frankly, I want to talk more about the context than the content. I'm dismayed. I've lived long enough. I was raised in Omaha, Nebraska. Lived long enough to have been redlined as growing up, discriminated against, layers of racism in the educational system. And as a university professor, I teach the civil rights movement and all of the impediments that the African Americans faced prior to the civil rights and during the civil rights movement. Impediments, poll tax, grandfather clauses, literacy tests, and how many jelly beans are in a jar. Impediments to voting is nothing new. I, of course, went to the University of Nebraska, graduated in 1965, which may ring a bell, but in 1965, the 1965 Voting Rights Act was passed. I'm dismayed because I feel, and is reflected in my short comments written, that Nebraska is losing its way as it relates to democracy. And I say to you, the context is more important than the content. Winner take all was changed, and it has worked well. What's broken? What are you fixing? It's worked well. And those of us who have color in our skin we feel as if we're part of the system and our vote counts. It counted simply in 2008 and this year. But we don't understand the context of what you're trying to do. It seems like that you're going away pouting because we got an electoral vote. That's what the context looks like. And we surely have to keep our eyes on Nebraska democracy? After all, this is one of the 17 states that joined with the suit from Texas against the frivolous state, against the several states trying to get them not to be able to even cast their electoral votes. Why did Nebraska do that? I'm not sure. But it was an affront to democracy for us who live in Nebraska. I'm testifying today for the 5th or 6th times against voter ID. What's the problem? There is no fraud. And so I say to you, and if you do want to ask me questions, I surely have the answer to, what about California? What about the 48? But I want to appeal to this committee and to the legislature and to Nebraska. Let's keep democracy alive. This is can be interpreted as an affront to democracy. I feel as if the legislature is potentially wanting to step on my right in Congressional District 2 to have my vote counted during the presidential elections in my congressional district. It's personal. My time is up. I've got an hour more, but I won't persist.
Sure. It seems Senator Blunt has a question.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. That's the first time I've heard that go off all morning. So, to keep it very brief, Preston, would you say that the current electoral system allowed people to at least have the impression, whether people believe this or not, that minorities finally had a seat at the table when it came to democracy in Nebraska?
Yes, and let us not forget, based on people's age, it's the only system that they know.
Right.
And have known in their voting life. And they feel good about it because they have the opportunity to have their vote translated into an electoral vote. And this year, that we made history in who actually delivered that vote, but that's a minor point. So yes, and for me to go to my community and say that the legislature is considering undoing that sends a very bad message to my community about how Nebraska feels about it.
And it's only been just over 4 decades that the poll taxes no longer existed?
Right.
Right?
Yes, and some say, and I know this is not the hearing,
Voter ID is a type of
that voter
poll tax.
ID
Yeah,
is poll
I agree
tax.
with that.
So the context is, if I may augment it, is that Nebraska is not sure about the democracy as it relates to everyone. That's what it looks like. I surely wouldn't want to, as I look in all of your eyes, I see nothing but wonderful people who have Nebraska and democracy in their heart. But you must understand that in a complex and diverse community that we have, not only urban and rural, but in all the ethnicities and all the things that we must consider the impact of your actions on how we feel about our state and how new people feel about their state. In Omaha, we have the most South Sudanese in the whole country. I don't want to go back and tell the Sudanese that their vote has been watered down in congressional district. I'm going to be walking to another hearing about redistricting, and I'm going to, I wish I had this on tape, I'd just play that tape for that hearing, because we should be fair in the way that we draw those lines as well.
And I have one more question. So we're all very acutely aware of the protests that have happened. And obviously, there were a lot of people that joined those protests because they felt that their voices weren't being heard. Based on your experience, do you feel that when certain communities in Nebraska hear bills like this being pushed forward, that is yet another way for the man, or whoever we want to say it is, to dampen their spirits, to dampen their voice?
Absolutely, and not only that. Maybe I would say to this committee, look out for Preston Love. Because I'm the one that has to stand in front of the demonstrators and say, your voice does count. Your vote does count. Don't make me look silly by going back and say, this committee has decided to go back to winner take all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Any other questions? Senator Love?
Thank you, Vice Chair. And thank you, Mr. Love, for being here and speaking out.
My pleasure.
And I will be in the next committee also, so if I take a nap while you're speaking,
Yeah, no.
I've already heard it.
Well, I tell you what we can work out. If you just give my testimony. Yeah.
You could go to lunch. You spoke of the people in your community.
Yes.
And you spoke that your voice was finally heard because of this. What happens if there's somebody that doesn't align politically with your thoughts or most of it? How is their voice heard?
Oh, their voice is heard equally. And, you know, my point is not that the voices are not heard audibly. The voices are not heard in the context of voting, is what I meant. And in the context of voting, your voice is not heard if in your congressional district, and let me just kind of dotted line to some of the thoughts you had. In the rest of the states, I think they're making a mistake because it's the same problem no matter where in each congressional district. If you have a resounding victory in a congressional district for a candidate who does not win the state, the voices are not heard if it's winner take all. That's what I meant. But for those voices that don't win, by the way, our voice was not heard in the context of kind of how you're asking that question in 2016. We wanted our candidate to win, but we were okay with it because we felt the process was fair. So that's what I mean by that.
All right. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Senator Love. Other questions? Seeing none, thank you for your
I
testimony.
appreciate your time. Do the right thing.
Thank you. While we're getting ready for the next testifier, show of hands, people still want to testify today? All right. We're going to keep going. I will note for the record, we're losing a couple members to the exec board hearing in a moment, so the committee's going to dwindle. I think we've got enough time, but we do have to take a break before our 1:30 hearing. So if any of your points have been said beforehand, feel free to say you agree with the previous testifier. And not going to shut anybody off, not going to change the time limits, but just be mindful. So with that, we'll invite up our next time. With that, we'll invite up our next testifier. Welcome.
Vice Chair Hansen, members of the committee, my name is Weston Miller, W-E-S-T-I-N-M-I-L-L-E-R. I'm the Director of Public Policy with Civic Nebraska. I tried to scratch off everything that's already been said, so I'll be as quick as I can. Civic Nebraska does have the luxury of, as a nonpartisan organization, not caring which party or which color claims the dot in CD2. Our interest is that the person who receives the most votes wins the election. That might seem really obvious, but that is why we're opposing LB 76. I am not at all here to defend our current system as perfect. I don't think it's perfect. I just believe that this legislation moves us even further in the wrong direction. As an organization, Civic Nebraska also supports a national popular vote for president. We fully understand the Electoral College was a part of the founding pact that led to the ratification of the Constitution, but so was an agreement to not outlaw slavery. Just because we agreed to something a long time ago doesn't mean it's a good idea. This bill, to me, is about one question, which is simply, should the person who receives the most votes be elected? We think the answer is yes, and that is kind of the end of our thought process. I do want to address a couple of things that have been brought up in today's hearing quickly. First, I am genuinely excited to hear Senator Slama's strong anti-gerrymandering rhetoric. She's absolutely right that our current system is vulnerable to gerrymandering. There's just no question about that. I would argue that the problem worth fixing, though, in that sentence is the gerrymandering, not our current system itself. That is, of course, something that Senator Slama herself has the ability to fix. As a member of the exec board, she could vote yes on Senator McCollister's LB 107, and I think that if she were to announce that in her closing, we would all violate the no applause rule pretty loudly. Finally, I have, just since nobody has yet, I have to address Ryan Hamilton, Director Hamilton's testimony, specifically when he referred to our current system as a, quote, voter inflation scheme in defense of the Electoral College. Some basic Googling and some basic math will show that to be an absurd assertion. California, Senator, this specifically, your son as a conservative in California is disenfranchised for a couple different reasons in this conversation. One you already addressed, but the other is that California has one electoral vote per 745,000 people who live in that state. Nebraska has one electoral vote per 380,000 people who live in our state. Wyoming has one electoral vote per 193,000 people who live in their state. So Nebraska's representation, if we want to talk about inflation, Nebraska's representation is inflated to twice that of a Californian. Someone from Wyoming, which I had to look it up, it's a Wyomingite is the actual word. A Wyomingite, their representation is inflated to 1.5 to 1 compared to someone who lives in Nebraska. That is inflation. We think it should be really simple that the person who receives the most votes should win the election. I understand that you as the Nebraska Legislature can't make that happen magically, which is why our current system is just the best we can do right now. To answer, I think it was Senator Halloran's question originally, I don't think the other 48 states are rubes. I just think that we have a bad system. Most states have said, well, bummer, this is a bad system. Nebraska and Maine have said we could at least make it a little bit better until we can switch to a national popular vote. So this just moves us in the wrong direction. So that's our nonpartisan perspective on a highly partisan issue. Thanks for hearing me out, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there questions? Weston, I would have one question. So related to kind of proportionally talk about electoral votes for states, similarly within the state, there was talk earlier about a congressional district that had more people or less people.
Yeah.
So on that, would a highly populated or less populated, trying to frame this, what would be the difference between a highly populated and less populated? Like who would have more sway over their district electoral vote?
Great question. So, and I think Senator Lowe, you brought this up a couple times, and it's an important conversation. I think there's sometimes some confusion between the notion of one person, one vote, and one state, one vote. I totally appreciate the idea of like unity and conformity and how we conduct our elections. But the state voting as a unit is not a substitute for one person, one vote, which is the real principle. How the Nebraska system or the California system, we'll call it, the standard system, those are just two different ways of how we apportion this already, diluted or inflated number of votes. Congressional districts have to be equal, at least roughly equal in population. So I do want to challenge the notion that CD2 is vastly more populated than CD1 or CD3, and that will be, any disparity will be amended in the next redistricting process. The idea is we divide them according to population. So each congressional district has equal say in our unequal number of electors that goes into the overall pot. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? All right, seeing none.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you. Well, it's still morning, so good morning. My name is Dennis Kirkpatrick. That is Dennis Kirkpatrick. If you excuse me a little bit, on this it says I was supposed to address Chairman Brewer, but he's not here, so I'll amend that in my statement. So, Vice Chairman Hansen and members of the committee. Today, I have come up from Auburn, Nebraska, which is in Senator Slama's district. I attend Prue State College and study social science education with a political science minor. My alma mater is Auburn High School, which is where Senator Slama also went to high school. And in fact, I'm fairly certain we had the same government teachers. Teachers who taught me that Nebraska's legacy of nonpartisanship was a virtue to be celebrated. What is clear, as I sit here, is that this legislation only stands as a clearly partisan attempt to undo the bipartisan legacy of this legislative body. We are one of 2 states to use this system of electoral apportionments, such to the fact that with our current system of electoral college apportionment, we have had candidates from both sides of our partisan aisle visit our state in an attempt to win over District 2 voters. If Senator Slama's bill had been enacted prior to the 2020 general election, I am fairly certain that neither party would have visited our state this cycle. Not only does this bill negatively impact our political and partisan system of presidential elections in Nebraska, it also stands to only exacerbate the urban versus rural divide in this state. Nebraska is not only a rural state, but with 2 distinct parts, the Omaha and Lincoln metro areas are half of our state, with the other half being the rural agrarian culture that I know so well from being in my community. This divide can be seen in our 3 congressional districts. District 1 and District 3 are mostly agricultural, although Lincoln is located in District 1. District 2, however, is mostly urban and suburban. The Omaha World Herald reported in March of 2020 that the Omaha metro area is likely to hit 1 million people in 2025. The people of Omaha and the subsequent metro area will only stand to lose representation in the Electoral College. Let's be clear about what this bill would mean for Omaha. Not only would they lose an important voice in the national discussion, but would lose the media and subsequent revenue that comes with national attention. Omaha's electoral vote is a competitive and fair system that allows a fair opportunity for both sides to compete for more than just the rural majority of Nebraska's votes. And so, Mr. Vice Chairman, in conclusion, I say that in the spirit of independence and nonpartisanship that this great legislative body was founded, I implore you to reject this bill, rather than entertaining this brazenly partisan stunt. This body should focus on genuine electoral reforms. Legislation like LB 76 would only work to delegitimize our nonpartisan elections. Electoral reform should only exist to encourage the idea that our elections are free and fair, and not simply a farce to be manipulated by the politics of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kirkpatrick. Questions to the committee? Seeing none, thank you. And I think I forgot to do this earlier. I should note for the record, Senator McAllister did join us for a while and then had to leave, so missed his opportunity to introduce himself. Welcome.
Hello, my name is Jack McGill, Jackmcgill, capital Gill. Now, I'm not really a political person, and I don't know anything about politics. I'm just a normal Omaha person, hopefully going to get my real estate license. But my original opinion, I was thinking about this whole case that we have today, was the Republican. Can I ask the name who brought us all here? I forgot that.
The introducer, Senator Slama?
So, yeah. So originally I thought possibly this was just a jealousy against losing of Trump. But I have an opinion is Nebraska is a red state, a very big red state, and we're broken in 3 parts. And we have the Hope Circle, which is Omaha, Lincoln, and the other areas around that are Democrat. And I believe that Hope Circle brings hope to voters and minorities, because without that, if we get it away, I had a friend who lived in a rural town, and no one liked her. Everyone was against her opinions, and she felt lonely. And she moved to Omaha, and she had a new foundation of what she could do here. And she had a way to vote, and she had a hope, and that's why I like to call it the Hope Circle. So if we get rid of that, if we get rid of our split vote, I think minorities will lose hope. They'll lose the fighting for it, and then whenever you go to vote, I feel like it'll feel just depressed to vote. Because when I voted for my first time in the 2020 election, I was very scared to vote, but I was so happy to see my area turn blue. And to get that taken away, it's just like, well, my vote doesn't matter to me, apparently. But it's just having that hope that we have something in Nebraska to keep us on the people who want to vote blue and who want the people who should be in office to help us get on the right way to, sorry, I'm just a little nervous, but I just believe that this decision should be made right by the people. And that's all I have to say.
All right, thank you. You did great. Questions to the committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Still on opponents? Yep.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Erin Poor, E-R-I-N-P-O-O-R. And I want to thank members of the committee for allowing us to have testimony on this bill. And I want to thank you for hearing mine. I want to let you know that I oppose LB 76. I'm a graduate student at Doane University. I'm studying clinical mental health counseling. I currently live in Lancaster County, and I'm a dual citizen of the United States and Cherokee Nation. I consider myself a temporary visitor on this land, which was, and forever will be the homelands of the Pawnee, the Omaha, the Oto-Missouri, and the Oceti-Sakowin. I oppose LB 76 and urge you all to oppose it as well. I did sit down last night to write this testimony, and I wrote and deleted it so many times because I wrote a lot about the history of the Electoral College. And I wrote about how the Electoral College's origin was rooted in anti-democratic theories with white, wealthy, male supremacy being at the very heart of it. I wrote about indigenous peoples being called merciless Indian savages in our Constitution, and I wrote about how Black Americans were categorized as subhuman by the constitutional framers with the so-called 3/5 compromise, directly affecting issues of taxation, congressional representation, and the Electoral College. I wrote about how this dehumanizing rule favored states with large enslaved populations, giving those white wealthy landowning men an outsized power over northern states. I wrote about how the country came close to abolishing the Electoral College completely in 1970, but a filibuster by two Southern white racist lawmakers in the US Senate ended that opportunity for hundreds of millions of people for generations. Again, demonstrating the outsized power of a particular demographic in this country. But then I erased all of the details of that history because I thought to myself, these are my senators and they know this. They know this history and they know the racist origins of the Electoral College. I don't need to remind them of the fact that this structure is antithetical to the kind of democracy we strive for in this country, and more specifically, antithetical to the democracy we strive for in this state. Nebraska's government is a unicameral because the people are the second house. In this state and in this building, we pride ourselves for the power we give to the voices of the people. Our electoral college distribution system also honors that power of the people's voice as much as it can in such an antiquated, ill-suited system for today's country. People vote when they think their vote will matter. What you're doing today with this bill, Senator Slama, is telling Nebraskans that if they don't vote with the conservative majority in this state, their vote won't matter. This is a depressing thought, a vote that doesn't matter in a democracy. And that's exactly what happens. The vote is depressed. Less people will participate in a democracy if they don't think their vote will matter. I'm not naive. I know that you all are likely very aware of that, which is again upsetting to think about, that you know this history of this faulty institution, that you know the impacts this will have on people who vote for Democrat or progressive candidates. And yet here we are, again, fighting for representation in a representative democracy. It's just not right. We need to embrace the diversity of thought, of culture, and of people in this state. People who do not think like conservatives are not the enemies to conservatives. We are your daughters. We are your neighbors. We are your friends. We disagree, and that's healthy. We need that in a democracy. But to suppress those who you don't agree with, that's not a healthy democracy, and it's just not democracy. I just want to address a few points from Senator Slama's introduction. She mentioned several times that 48 other states do winner-take-all, essentially saying everybody else is doing it. And I just want to say that peer pressure is not the political theory that should guide Nebraska's democratic policy. She also talked about the intention of the framers. We talked about that a lot today. But ultimately, the framers decided to leave this up to the states. We as a state have the opportunity to make this decision, and it doesn't have to be impacted by what Alaska is doing or what Iowa is doing. It's important to what Nebraskas need to do because of our Nebraskan experience. Senator Slama also referenced that our state elections, our state elected offices are winner takes all. She kind of said that this governor's race is winner takes all, so shifting our electoral college distribution to kind of match that would be better. But our executive offices in this state are elected by popular vote. So a popular vote is what she's saying that we should be moving towards. So just wanted to point that out. Senator Slama also said that her bill advances equity in voting, but I really don't think she's using that term correctly, because equity is justice that is free from bias or favoritism. And you're ensuring that a grossly racially biased construct like the Electoral College is enacted more fully here when you propose this bill. So please oppose LB 76, and let's focus our time on efforts on building a better, more representative democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Poore. Questions to the committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
How's it going? I'm Brad Christian Salas. That's BRADCHRISTIAN-SALLIS. I'm here representing myself, and I just want to talk about this bill just because of the work that I do, encouraging people to participate in our democracy. Whether it's, having people come up to testify on different bills, or having people, helping them get out to vote. And there's been a lot of talk on whether or not the blue dot and the ability of those dots and our different congressional districts to flip and separate from the others, if it makes a real difference in voter turnout. And without a doubt, it does. It also makes a difference in helping Black voters and all types of Black and brown folks in Omaha be able to feel like their voice counts. But even beyond that, the idea of winner take all is partially really alluring. I get it, because I think I'm an amazing organizer, and I think I'm going to be able to convince the entire state to believe my policies, and I would rather not have to worry if one congressional district could throw that off. But that's not how it should work. If one congressional district can throw that off, that means we need to do a better job convincing people and bringing them to our side. It doesn't mean that we just tell them to shut up. And that's what this bill does. That's what LB 76 does. It says, we haven't done a good enough job yet. We're not gonna get there, so just shut up. That's not the way it should be. I know once I've convinced everyone, I'll keep them convinced and I'll do a good job at it. And I think that's what everyone should do and set their goal to. It shouldn't be to stop people from participating. So I won't take up too much time because I know everybody's been here a long time. But yeah, any questions?
All right, thank you for your testimony. Are there questions?
Cool.
Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're nearing the end. Any other opponents? Thanks.
Daniel Epstein, Daniel Epstein. Thank you, members of the committee, for this time to speak. I will try to not belabor the point. You sat through hours of testimony so far. I think the question really is, why do we want to go back to an antiquated system? It's already been brought up, and we don't need a history lesson here today, but the Electoral College was established by our founding fathers who were white, male landowners. Women did not have the right to vote. Blacks and minorities did not have the right to vote. Why would we want to go back to a system established by white male power brokers to consolidate their power and to keep their power? Why do we want to go back to a winner-take-all system? Senator, you asked multiple people so far today, what was wrong between 1867 and 1991? What was right during those years? For 53 years, women didn't have the right to vote. For approximately 100 of those years, minorities had problems voting. And that was an all winner-take-all system. So why would we want to go back to that? In 1991, you've been asking people, are the other states rubes because they're not doing what Nebraska's doing? That's the wrong way to look at that. This legislature, 30 years ago, had the ability and the strength to make a decision that we're gonna change and we're gonna do something different. We're gonna allocate our votes differently than what we've done in the past. And you've had that ability through apparently 16 attempts to change it. You've had the strength to keep that. Why do we want to go back? Just because Robert Kennedy showed up in Auburn in 1968? I mean, let's face facts. They're not coming back. There's not going to be whistle-stop tours by railway or by bus in the smaller cities in Nebraska if we go back to a winner-take-all in Nebraska. That time has passed. We have evolved as a city. We've evolved as a state. We've evolved as a country. Why do we want to go back to a system that keeps areas of the country not answering? Senator Lowe, who's not here right now, has asked multiple times about California. Obviously, the people in California that are Republicans would love a system like Nebraska's, because those people, the pockets like his son, would have an ability to vote and would have their voices heard. What's wrong with our system right now in Nebraska? There isn't one. The only thing wrong with our system in Nebraska right now is that in 2 years, 2008 and 2020, the second congressional district became a blue dot. Who cares? Who cares that certain people in the congressional district 2 voted for Obama and then Biden? Because in 2020, the second congressional district not only voted for Biden, but voted for Bacon. We're a diverse area. So why not let those people have their say and who they think their president should or should not be? I mean, I'm against the Electoral College in general. This is not the time nor the place to abolish that. But why should we be going back to a system that, what was good about it? What was good about it? I mean, that's the question that I have for anyone. Can anyone say that what was good about it just because the founding fathers put it in place, but it has evolved since then? That's all questions I have, unless anyone has anything direct to me.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there questions to the committee? Seeing none, thank you. All right, any other opponents to the bill? Seeing none, any neutral testimony to the bill? All right, seeing none, Senator Slama, we invite you up to close. While you're coming up, I will read the letters into the record. So for position letters on LB 76, we had 3 proponents and 72 opponents. And then for written testimony, we had only opponents, and these are all opponents. Rob McIntarfer, herself from Lincoln, Nebraska. Abby Swatsworth from Out, Nebraska. Gavin Geis from Common Cause, Nebraska. Alicia Shelton, self from Omaha. Meg Michaelichuk, Planned Parenthood Advocates of Nebraska. Michelle Jenkins from Civic Nebraska. Kayla Meyer with the Lincoln Young Professionals Group. And Jennifer Krieger from the Greater Omaha Chamber. And with that, I recognize Senator Slama to close.
Wonderful. Thank you, Vice Chairman Hansen, and thank you to you and the rest of the members of the committee and the testifiers for being here today to express their thoughts on LB 76. We talked about a wide range of issues here today, from concerns about the Electoral College to the amount of money spent in politics in Nebraska. I don't want to belabor any of those points so that we can get to lunch and get back here in the afternoon. But I did just want to touch on one point briefly. We are obviously in a redistricting year this year, so I did want to make the point that every time you draw congressional districts, every time we do that, once they're put in place, they start moving out of balance. Folks move in and out of the district, they're born and they pass away. And that movement out of balance happens for the next decade until we start again and redraw the lines. Of course, we draw them as equally as possible, but the whole point of redistricting every 10 years is to fix that imbalance that results just from the movement of people. The current system makes certain that the voters across the 3 congressional districts will have votes that are weighted differently as population changes across the districts. Even when we do redistricting, we don't have the exact same amount of people in every single congressional district. We get as close as we can, but it's always going to be imbalanced. It's just a matter of fact. Only under the winner-take-all system do all Nebraska votes count the same in every presidential election, no matter in which cycle that election occurs. Again, thank you so much to the committee for being here today. I appreciate it. I appreciate the discussion. And would appreciate your consideration of LB 76.
Thank you, Senator. Questions? All right, seeing none, that'll close our hearing on LB 76 and our hearings for the morning. We'll be back at 1:30. Thank you.